Happy New Year! Welcome to the Great Lakes Chamber Music Festival's first virtual vignette of 2021 and the sixth overall in the series. Tonight's vignette features the extraordinary Swiss-born American pianist Gilles Vonsattel and his wife, the brilliant Metropolitan Opera Orchestra violinist Sarah Crocker Vonsattel, who was formerly a member of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra. After the performance, Jennifer and I will moderate a live Q&A session with Gilles and Sarah. Please submit your questions using the YouTube chat feature. In honour of Gilles' Swiss heritage, here's our first cocktail video of 2021.
Hello, and welcome to the first virtual vignette of 2021. Feels good saying that. I'm honored to be included in this particular series. I remember my time at the 2018 Great Lakes Chamber Music Festival very fondly. I remember intense performances, very warm audiences, just a great week filled with a feeling of friendship and love of great music. I'm, as I said, honored to be part of this series. It was a treat for us to prepare this in our house. You're going to be hearing selections prepared from our home. This home in particular is in New York City. We're on the Upper West Side of Manhattan here. And we are, my wife is a wonderful violinist and is in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And we do have two small children here. And it's quite a production getting this kind of thing going in here these days. We had fun doing it. So it's a bit of a house concert feeling in the program length and structure. We're going to begin with a piece by Louise Farrenc Air, russe, varié. I'll talk more about that before we launch into that. We will then hear Liszt's Transcendental Etude No. 10. And then I'm very lucky that Sarah is going to be joining me for the middle movement of the Strauss Violin Sonata. So some words about the Farrenc, the first piece we're going to play. Air, russe, varié means essentially variations on a Russian theme. Now, Louise Farrenc is a name you're going to hear more of now, if you haven't already, with the recent interest in women composers. But this is a composer that pianists tend to really know about, and I've known about her for a long time. This piece in particular, I heard in just one of those moments where I had a late night drive. A flight had landed late at Geneva Airport, and I had to get somewhere in Valais in Switzerland. So I had a lot of sort of mountain driving at night to do, and I was trying to stay awake, and I was flipping through stations, and I heard this really beautiful music come on, piano playing solo, and I thought, okay, this is probably something by Mendelssohn that I just had never heard, and I was pretty hooked, and I stuck around, and it was this piece by Louise Farrenc, this Air, russe, varié, and it turned out this program that was on was an extensive look at her life and works, interviewing experts, and just a really nice complete picture, and it was really fascinating. She was one of the major pianists of the 19th century. She was sort of the piano professor in Paris from about 1840 into the 1870s. She had lots of students. She wrote books on technique. She wrote lots of solo piano music. She wrote great chamber music, actually. Her greatest successes were actually in chamber music. And I've been fortunate to play some of those pieces since. And I'm always up for it. So this piece was, after this drive where I heard this piece, and I thought, oh, this sounds so great, and it's the right length, and it's, this kind of music is interesting because it's right on the cusp between classicism and the sort of heavier romanticism that would come out of Schumann, Chopin, and of course Liszt. And so it still has the elegance and the transparency, the clarity of classicism, but you can begin to feel that kind of heavier artillery creeping in. And it shares a lot with Mendelssohn in that sense. And it's really brilliant pianism. And so the way the piece unfolds, you have an opening little kind of arpeggiation on G minor just to establish the key. Then you get the theme, the Russian theme, which is very clear, very simple, sounds like folk music, very short. And then you have a series of variations that have fun with this theme, basically. You hear different things done to it. And then in the style of a Beethoven or his successors, you get a fugue. You get a pretty intense fugue. And then you get this interesting, it gets very humorous, and it kind of ends on kind of a whiff of just, fun, switch to major, and has some of that arpeggiation to balance the G minor arpeggiation that began the piece to begin with. So just in 10 minutes, you have a really, really appealing form and just a great piece that, as I said, you really can't mistake that this composer was a great pianist. So speaking of composers who are also excellent pianists, of course we come to Franz Liszt. The piece I'm going to play for you now is from the famous Transcendental Etudes or Studies, which, if you look it up, they're written in 1851. However, it's really interesting. Liszt actually began a set of studies when he was 13 years old, and some traces of that original version even can be found in the final version sort of 1851. There's even another version of Grandes Etudes from 1838. So he was always working on this and revising it, this body of work, and his pianism was getting modified and refined and simplified, made more effective, as also the pianos of the day were changing, just technologically. But what we have here in the number 10, which is sometimes nicknamed the Appassionata, it shares a key of F minor with that similarly dark and passionate work by Beethoven, the Appassionata Sonata. We have a work of unbridled passion and operatic intensity. And for me, this was a piece that when I was a teenager, I remember I got to play it and I thought, wow, this is fun. This is pretty great. And nowadays, I had to bring it back for the first time in a long time for some concert that actually happened in person out in Lake Tahoe. And for me, it was great fun to bring it back. Having played a lot of Liszt's music in the ensuing years, I'm a big fan of Liszt. And I think the challenge always when we play this music is to try to play it well, in the sense to really give it some shape, make it make sense, play it beautifully, phrase it, and while having those things that require control, also to have it feel on the edge of just being totally wild, And so that trade-off that, when you talk about it, it sounds so easy. Well, I could either be in control or I could make it really exciting. In practice, when you're dealing in the heat of the moment with this level of, it's technically speaking and physically speaking, so pushed what the composer is asking for you as a pianist, that trade-off becomes something that you're living kind of like, you feel like your life is on the line in that trade-off. So please enjoy Transcendental Etude number 10, sometimes called the Appassionata.
Hi, my name is Sarah Vonsattel, and I'm so happy and honored to join Gilles today for the final piece on this Vignette program. It's also a pleasure to reach out to Michigan audiences in this way because I feel a very special connection to Michigan. I actually lived in Royal Oak for 1 year when I was a member of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra for its 2007-2008 season. Although I was only there for 1 year, I have very fond memories of that time, of performing with that amazing orchestra with talented colleagues and for such supportive audiences. Today you're going to hear the second movement of Strauss's Violin Sonata. This sonata is a youthful work composed when Strauss was 23 years old, and it's the last instrumental chamber music work that he wrote before really dedicating himself more to writing symphonic work and the types of things that we might associate more with Strauss. Nonetheless, it holds a very treasured place in the repertoire for violinists and pianists alike. And it's entitled Improvisation. What does that mean? It's not actually improvised. It's written out. Strauss thought through it very carefully. But I think his intent with that title was a feeling that as we're performing it, we're making it up as we go along, and a sense that both audiences and performers are discovering the piece when they hear it, as if for the first time. It begins with a beautiful melody that sounds like lead. You could imagine it being sung. And then a much more ominous and foreboding motive in a minor key enters, with much more complex textures that I think foreshadow some of the kind of writing we hear from Strauss in his orchestral work later on. He transitions back to that first theme again through a section that is full of these very light, cascading arpeggiated figures in both instruments. And to me, even though this is a youthful work, this is just so undeniably Strauss, this kind of writing. It's graceful, it's almost like smoke rising, or like filigree or embroidery, and it reminds me a lot of his string writing from his orchestral work and operas. When the main theme returns again at the end of the movement, it's transformed, it's embellished, but it also is split up more between the instruments. There's much more interplay between the violin and piano, almost as if they're having a conversation and finishing each other's sentences. We hope you enjoy this performance from our home, and it's such a pleasure to play for you, and we hope that you'll stay for the chat afterwards as well. Thank you so much.
Hello, welcome, Gilles and Sarah. You can hear me, I think.
Yes, we can hear you. Great.
Fantastic, fantastic. Welcome to everybody. I just have to say that was absolutely wonderful program that you put together for us. Thank you so much, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. But first, for our virtual audience, they're not virtual in any way; they are real people. All mostly in Michigan, I think. If you'd like to ask a question, you need to have a YouTube account, be logged in, and then type your question into the YouTube chat feature. That's what we need to do. I can see already. Jen is here too, and she's monitoring another computer. It's like Wolf Blitzer's situation room, isn't it? Here, basically, so we need to have a little, like a ticker or something, maybe. But she's got some questions lined up. But first of all, we want to take the opportunity to chat to you ourselves. Sarah, that was just wonderful. The Strauss, absolutely great. We've had an evening of sort of perfumed romanticism. Absolutely. One question that occurred to me as soon as you started playing that, how many Strauss operas have you played now at the Met? Have you done them all?
Gosh, I have not done Ariadne personally.
Right.
I've done pretty much everything else. Yeah.
Which is your favorite?
I love Die Frau ohne Schatten, which we were supposed to have done the season, actually. And I hope we get to do that soon.
Yeah, I hope so too. And Gilles, do you get much opportunity, pre-pandemic, and one hope post-pandemic to get along to the Met? Are you able to score tickets?
I do. I'm an addict, a Met addict, actually. It's sort of the kind of thing where if you've had experiences, as a student, I used to get nosebleed seats at the Met when I was at Juilliard and at Columbia. And then I realized, of course, it's nice to be at the Met, but if you can get those seats that Sarah sometimes gets where you're right up there, and something like Die Frau ohne Schatten is happening right in front of you, and you're in that orchestra sound world and with the voices, and there's really nothing quite like it. And it's a bit addictive, and I tend to go quite a lot when I can now.
Yeah. And Sarah, without going into too much detail, it's painful for you, I'm sure, and for everybody. Do you expect to be back sometime this year? I mean, we've been seeing various bits of news from Dr. Fauci about performances possibly starting in the fall. I don't know.
That is the hope. I mean, the hope is that we can start our season in fall, September of 2021. Hopefully the vaccine rollout continues smoothly, and people will feel safe being in a theater at that time. So we're just keeping our fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Goodness me. So, Gilles, you've been able to keep going in some way with projects throughout the pandemic, and
I've had been relatively lucky in the sense. Well, I had one big project in Europe, which actually happened, and that's simply because I have two passports. I was born in Switzerland, And I was naturalized in the States when I was in my early 20s. And so I actually can easily travel to Europe. And so I recorded actually a big piece by Richard Strauss, who's kind of a fixture tonight so far, I guess, in this event. It was a crazy left-hand piano concerto with the Bern Symphony and Mario Venzago conducting, who's a wonderful musician. And we actually played twice in front of real audiences. And this was in September and early October. And at that point, I hadn't heard an orchestra, around me playing so long. And to hear, it's one of these pieces where Strauss gives something in the orchestra. Everybody in the orchestra has something to do in this piece. So to go from no orchestra at all to hearing like the contrabassoon and like every single instrument you can imagine having their moment, and then you're playing with that, was an unforgettable moment. And since then, things have been, there have been, of course, recording projects and some interesting things in the US. And just recently, on Saturday night, I played a Beethoven First Piano Concerto in Augusta, Georgia, because, of course, we have different rules in this country about what's possible. And so I was playing with an orchestra, distance, everybody masked, and there were something like 300 people in the hall. So, and I'm supposed to go to Europe next week for a chamber music recording. And again, it's this logic where every time you have something, you sort of calculate what the odds are of it actually happening. Yes. When you prepare, and of course, I'm making it sound like, almost everything was canceled. These are like the isolated events that have happened. So.
Indeed, I think Jen's hoping that something comes my way soon. She's getting sick of me. I know what you mean. I also understand you've released a CD.
Yes, well, so the Strauss will be on CD. It should be out within a week or two, and it's a combination of this piece with another left-hand piano concerto. The piece has been recorded. It's called Panathenaentzug for people who are Strauss aficionados out there. It's one of these pieces written for the pianist Paul Wittgenstein. Strauss actually had written him a piece before based on the Symphonia Domestica, in which Wittgenstein complained that the piano had nothing to do. So then Strauss wrote him this piece where the piano has too much to do. and that's sort of, the piece is kind of absurdly difficult. So I was glad to make it out uninjured of that experience. Absolutely.
And did you use your left hand and only your left hand?
In the concert, I was scrupulous. And I followed instructions. In the recording, when I felt twinges of pain in certain moments, I made some rapid adjustments every now and then. Yeah. But yes, it was quite an adventure.
Excellent. I wanted to come back before we move on to the questions that we have. And how many questions do we have?
We have a handful.
A handful of questions. That's great. Good. How could, without going into too much detail, it's a family show. Could you tell us where you met and how often you've played duo repertoire together? I know I met you, Sarah, out at Lake Tahoe. When I was there with the late and beloved Joel Revson, who's really one of the first people that we knew to succumb to COVID-19. But there was a wonderful festival, and you were certainly playing in the orchestra there. But then after, I think Gilles and I played the Beethoven Fourth Cello Sonata for Michael Parloff's series in New Jersey. Mike Parloff being a distinguished former principal flutist of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. And I started digging around his archive on YouTube. And for those of you who are listening who don't know about the Parlance chamber concerts, there's a treasure trove of great performances, beautifully recorded and shot there. And I came across you playing with Gilles there. It was absolutely beautiful playing. But just tell us how long have you been together, and how much have you done together?
Well, we were at a summer festival together. That's where I first encountered you. But then we were at Juilliard together when I was doing my master's, and we played together a little bit there. And since then, it's not that often that we have the opportunity to play together, but we really enjoy it when we do. And during pandemic, everybody's playing solo Bach and Izai sonatas and all, Paganini caprices. And, I was lucky that I could be like, hey, do you want to read a sonata?
Nice.
Yeah.
So it's nice to live with a pianist.
Yeah, indeed. God, I wish I could do that. I've been trying to to train Eliza up, our youngest daughter, but she goes her own way.
If you can believe it, we've been reading the Brahms E-flat viola sonata lately in here, and she's sounding pretty good. It's a very new project, right?
Oh, fantastic!
Project.
Did you always play the viola, or is this a new thing? Oh, great! You've managed to get your hands on one.
Yeah, it's been underneath the piano collecting dust for several years. I tested it off. So
wonderful, that's wonderful. And you have 2 children as well. And how are they doing?
You don't hear anything at the moment, so
that's good. That's always a good
sign. No screams or fire alarms going off right now.
Very good.
So they're great. They're this is a huge change for them this year, but children are so adaptable, and they're really happy to have us home.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, we're finding the same thing too. Good. Well, look, let's take a couple of questions that have come in. So what's the first one, Jen?
Well, the first one was from Michael Morin, a member of our board. He says, you are a fan of Liszt and a fan of contemporary music. What draws you to new or newer composers?
Well, I think the same spirit, revolutionary spirit in Liszt of finding what's possible and discovering new ideas, which Liszt is, it's all over his sort of musical DNA is to try to find new ways of doing things. That same excitement I can find in modern composers who are trying to do new things. Extended techniques, for example, is a great example. Some pianists will, and some musicians will roll their eyes a little bit at extended techniques and think, oh, here we go, we're destroying the instrument again. But I've been fortunate enough to work with musicians who are great at that stuff and play actually very eloquently and beautifully. And watching them, I realized this really can be done in a way that's consistent and coherent with the whole art form. And it's very exciting when you find yourself doing something that not many people have done before, which in classical music, it's a challenging art form in the sense that, okay, let's say I have a recital and I'm playing a Beethoven sonata. Well, you're stepping in the footsteps, right, of so many people who came before you. It's very refreshing when you're going to do something challenging that not many people have attempted before. So that's one of the things that attracts me to it.
Indeed. And I was going to ask you, because we've talked about this in the past, but when you talk about extended techniques, that can be playing with different parts, your arm, elbows, that kind of thing, but also adding things to the piano, inside the piano. Is that something you're happy to do with your own piano, which sounds very beautiful on the recording? But
yes, I mean, you have to be very careful. I think, again, like doing all this stuff from a position of knowledge of what's possible. Like, for example, I had a project recently to do the Cage sonatas and interludes. And something as simple as the using brass as the material that you're putting in the strings, because that's softer and won't damage the strings. And there's usually, and if you consult a good piano technician and you become informed about this stuff, there are ways of doing this that are safer for instruments. Of course, and also, you mentioned, you can. Extended techniques. I think some of the more interesting stuff involves harmonics inside the piano, pedal effects, things like that. And again, a lot of experimentation will yield very different results. So hopefully we can do it in a way that maintains these beautiful instruments.
Exactly. And actually, talking about extended techniques, I know this is off Michael's question, but I just wondered, Sarah, did you by any chance perform in the Thomas Addis opera that the Met did? Because I know perhaps, I don't know if it would be unfair of me to say, but the Met is perhaps not, known for embracing huge amounts of contemporary music, but when it does it big style, and certainly that's what happened in that. Were you asked to do anything that made you go,
I did play in both his operas that we did at the Met. The one you're thinking of is with the tiny violins, right?
It's terrible. I've forgotten the
that one was the Exterminating
Angel. Yes, exactly.
The first few stands of the 2 violin sections were asked to play on. I don't know if they were 8th size violins or 16th. They were tiny. I was not one of those people. I was back in the section, but it was really hilarious. I mean, these tiny little instruments, and it was actually quite difficult, like technical stuff they had to play and really practice on. It was just so funny.
That's very
I
interesting.
did really well with it, but I didn't get to play one of those.
And there were live sheep on stage in that production, right?
There were. I couldn't crane my neck far enough to see them from the pit, but I hear there were.
Fantastic. Perhaps you could smell them. I don't know. Who knows? It's a distinctive aroma, isn't there, with sheep? Huh?
Yeah.
Fantastic. And the next
question was from Sandy Reitelman. She, still on the question of the opera, she says, Sarah, I'm curious as to how playing in the Met Opera Orchestra versus the DSO has informed your playing in general terms.
It's a really interesting question. Well, first of all, they're both such phenomenal orchestras, and my experience in the DSO was incredible, and I learned so much from the people around me and the sound around me in that beautiful hall. The biggest difference between playing in a symphony orchestra and an opera orchestra is of course that you're on stage or in the pit. Mm-hmm. And, although the Met Orchestra does play on stage as well, we play concerts in Carnegie Hall every season. We really are often quite hidden visually, and we also we're really following the singers in a way that's very flexible, and it's really chamber music in a way. Like any great orchestra has that flexibility and that ability to turn on a dime and just go with what happens in a moment. But I feel like in an opera orchestra, more things like that happen. There are more surprises thrown at you. And I love that about playing in opera. And it was something when I first joined the orchestra, something would happen in a performance and everybody around me would just get it. And I was just like, that's amazing that, they just all know this well enough to know what to do in that situation. It's really something that takes years for an ensemble to build.
It really is giant chamber music, actually, amongst any symphony orchestra really in the world. I've always felt that listening to the opera orchestra. Gilles, have you noticed that? I know in the back in the day when I used to play more concertos than I do now, I can remember quite distinctly playing a few standard concertos like the Dvorak and the Elgas with opera orchestras, mm-hmm. and noticing a real difference and being quite surprised by it. And I don't know if you've had the same experience.
Well, I think that first of all, it's possible that for those orchestras that it's not what they're doing day in and day out. So there's a certain freshness to it. And it's therefore has a very different feel for them. There is definitely a sense when you play standard repertory with orchestras, with great orchestras especially, they've been there and done it, and it's great, and it's sort of like, oh, you do something different there, okay, And with the I think with an opera orchestra that's having a concert experience on stage, outside the pit, there's definitely that freshness, and of course, we like to say, that everything in a way is chamber music in the sense of how we listen to each other. And I think that is from the listening to the breathing of the singer to the individual timings. There was a real sensitivity to that. That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's palpable. I can remember the Elgar cello concerto, actually, for those of you who may vaguely recall the way that piece goes. It starts with a kind of recitative for the cello, and this recitative comes back right at the end of the piece. And I was playing this piece with the Orchestra of Welsh National Opera, which is a very, very good opera company. In fact, I think for many years its music director was an Italian man called Carlo Rizzi, who I know has conducted the Met on numerous occasions. I think he loved being in Wales so much because the Welsh do have a certain sort of affinity for the voice and for operatic singing, and perhaps also operatic behavior occasionally.
I was going to say they're known for their melodrama.
They are. But I remember getting right to the end of the piece where the recitative comes back again, but this time it's punctuated by some stronger chords in the orchestra. It goes bang, bang, these two chords. And the way the orchestra, the WNO, played those two chords, it sounded like Puccini. It was absolutely this boom, boom, dry together, without really, and it gave me a completely different perspective on the piece. And I think that's a wonderful thing that you get from working with singers, isn't it?
Also, I love this story because of the inherently theatric, dramatic element of opera, which we can all use to think about in interpretation of any music, you know, just bringing that kind of gesture to life. It's great.
Exactly. Well, that's so. I mean, there's so much more to talk about. I wanted to say just very, very briefly. The Liszt and the Farrenc, absolutely wonderful. Louise Farrenc's music, I'm ashamed to say I only know a very, very little of it. Some of the chamber music. There's one cello sonata, which is which I want to spread around a little bit. But did she write any opera? I'm not sure.
It's possible. I actually don't know about that. The pieces that I've encountered and played are the two quintets that are Trout quintet formation, which I would recommend without any reservation to any chamber music festival or your music list of your listeners and music lovers. They are wonderful pieces.
We will make a note of that.
Yeah, and they work well together with the Trout. Maybe she was even thinking of a companion work. You know, so.
Indeed, and of course, hovering over the whole evening. Even the Liszt is the gigantic presence of Wagner, of course, who's there, and how much one can hear their sort of interdependence musically speaking, even in the Transcendental Etude that you played was perhaps more of a sort of showpiece, but it's certainly Wagnerian chromaticism and shifts of harmony really audible in that too.
Yes, the moment for me in that piece that is just magic is this extended lyrical section that begins calmly and becomes, he writes disperato, and he's just one note over and over again, and this kind of extreme lyricism is very much that, and of course Liszt did it first, so yeah, I'd like to remind people of that. So.
Absolutely. Well, look, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to
kind of running out of time.
Wrap up this piece. It was wonderful.
We have one more question from one of our audience members, Colleen Booth. She would like to know, how old are your children, and are they musically inclined?
So yes, they are musically inclined. Our son Felix is 6, and our daughter Nina is going to be 4 in a few weeks. Felix plays the violin, and Nina is itching to start. That's going to happen really soon. And they sing constantly. They're very into everything that we do musically around here.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
That's wonderful. Well, look, before we sign off for the evening, for everybody who's here, including Gilles and Sarah, please stay tuned because there's one more musical treat coming our way. But first, I want to thank all the festival's benefactors, the sponsors, the donors for making another wonderful virtual vignette possible. We welcome you all to join us in presenting great music by donating on our website, greatlakeschambermusic.org. I've also got some good news to share. Based on your feedback, I'm programming the next series of the 3 virtual vignettes, which will carry us through the winter and the early spring months. The first of these will be on Wednesday, February the 17th, featuring Alessio Bax and Lucille Chung. Plans are also underway for the June 2021 Great Lakes Chamber Music Festival. We're working hard to try and make that as much of an in-person experience as we safely and possibly can, and there'll be more news on that soon. I want to highlight another exciting program coming up next week online, the YouTube premiere of John Luther Adams's Selah, The Breath of the World, which was performed outside at the 2020 Great Lakes Chamber Music Festival in collaboration with the Detroit Chamber Winds and Strings. I strongly recommend tuning in for that. That was a wonderful undertaking. And finally, we close with a special musical encore. Gilles and Sarah, please tell us about your encore.
Okay, so next you're going to hear a little piece called It Ain't Necessarily So. It's from George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess. And this is a transcription by the great violinist Jascha Heifetz.
Thank you.
Thank you.